And welcome to the Gen Mess with Tess, where we're not just fixing the mess, we're figuring out how to live in it. I'm your host, Tess Brigham. So let's start making sense of the mess together. So today is a solo show, just me. And today I want to talk about something that's been on my mind a lot lately. And it's really about what I talk about a lot, which is this new world of work and life and this life that Gen Z has been creating for themselves. Because when I really think about what's going on right now with this younger generation, Gen Z, when I think about the workplace and all the changes that have happened in the last 5-6 years, I think a lot about this, how this is an evolution, and we've been watching this evolution unfold in real time. And so it's easy to get caught up in this criticism of, the Gen Zers and the headlines about Gen Z being entitled or lazy or too sensitive. But after years of working with coaching, being a therapist, and listening to young people, I can tell you that what's happening right now is not a fluke, that this has been this evolution to where we are today. I'm going to take us back a little bit and explain a little bit about how we got here. Okay. So currently, by the end of 2025, 1 in 10 managers will be a Gen Zer. Gen Z already makes up about 18% of the workforce. So boomers are now down below 15%, which is huge. That's a huge shift in a short amount of time. But really, the bigger story, the thing that I want to talk about here is not just about numbers. It's really about values. That's what that we've had an evolution of values. It's about how each generation builds on the one before it. And if you trace back, you can see that every generation is a reflection or a mirror of the people that raised them. So think about it, right? So the silent generation raised the boomers. They grew up during the Depression and World War II, which was scarcity, uncertainty, survival. So they taught their children to seek stability, to follow the rules, and to build a good life through hard work. And right, then came the boomers. They were ambitious, driven, focused on status and success. And boomers wanted their kids to do well. So but they also work long hours. And boomers are very much the ones who built this modern work ethic. And it didn't really leave a lot of room for feelings. And then came my generation, Gen X, right? And we were the latchkey kids. We grew up in the shadow of divorce and economic shifts and the parents who were busy rebuilding their lives after a divorce, right? We learned how to be independent and not to ask for too much, to just figure it out on our own. We didn't expect emotional availability from our parents. And we wore that emotional self reliance, like this badge of honor. But when it came for our time to have kids, we wanted to do it differently. And I know I did because, as I mentioned, I'm a Gen Xer and my parents divorced when I was 6. My father remarried pretty quickly right after that. By the time I was 10, I had moved 100 miles away from my father and sister, moved to Berkeley, California with my mom. So, a lot had happened in a short amount of time. So much of my early life felt out of my control. And I remember the feeling of, even though my parents never said that to me and there was never their intention to make me feel this way, there was this feeling growing up where it was a little bit like, my feelings aren't so important that I had to just kind of keep my head down and keep going. Things that happened at school, certain struggles, you maybe shared it with your parents, but for the most part, you didn't. You didn't really ask for help because asking for help wasn't something that we did. And that's what, being strong meant back then. That's what it meant to be strong, right? You don't need anyone, don't make any waves, don't fall apart, don't be an embarrassment, don't do this or that. So when it came time for me to raise my own son, I wanted him to feel seen. I wanted him to know that his feelings mattered. I wanted him to feel safe. And that was a form of, evolution. And I can see the same instinct play out across my whole generation, right? We looked at our own childhoods, at the tough love, the rub some dirt on it kind of mentality, the lack of emotional space. And we decided, okay, we're going to raise our kids differently. But maybe like every generation before us, we swung the pendulum a little too far in the other direction. Because here's the thing, progress always looks messy in real time. When I think about my own parents, my mother's mother struggled with mental illness and was physically and emotionally abusive to my mom. And my mom made this conscious decision not to hit her children. And that was her form of progress. That was her form of changing the generational trauma that was happening. And my father's father was deeply critical. So my dad, you know, um, made a very conscious effort not to criticize, to be pretty mindful of how he's, criticizing my sister and I, trying not to do it. He wasn't always perfect. It wasn't always exactly what I needed, but it was progress. And so my mom, while not cruel, was an emotionally tough person. My dad, while not critical, could be emotionally unavailable. So I made a choice to be emotionally open, to talk about feelings, to make vulnerability feel safe. And that's what we do. Each generation tries to correct what hurt us, but those corrections don't come without consequences. So I've spent, many years now studying generations, but the most profound lessons that have come that I've learned about the generations is really from raising my son. My son, his name is Max, he struggles with mental health issues and he has for about 10 years now. And it's been a long, hard road, one that has really shaped our entire family. Even though it's just my husband and I and Max, our little unit has been very much shaped by his struggle with mental illness. And so my husband and I, we've made some enormous sacrifices for him. We've paid for very expensive private schools. We hired a personal tutor so that he could be homeschooled. We consolidated parts of our lives and careers to give him the best shot at stability that we could give him. And so now here we are with him in the next phase. He's almost 18, and we're at this part now where he's maturing and we're helping him do more for himself. But it's still very complicated because, right, that old school mentality will get in the back of my mind, the one that I grew up with, which says, oh God, just stop coddling, just throw him in the deep end, make him figure it out. Because that's what was done to me. That's what was done to my husband, right? We were able to build resilience. So shouldn't I help my kid build the same resilience? Right. But I know, as both a therapist and coach and as a mother, I know this isn't how it works because it doesn't work for everyone and it doesn't work for my son. So when my son started first having anxiety attacks in school in the third grade, we pulled him out of school. My mom came and tutored him for the rest of the year. And I often wonder, and I look back on that, should we have done that? Were we too accommodating with him? And this is something I think a lot about. And I know so many parents of kids with mental health challenges and other challenges struggle with the same question. So there's this constant push pull between wanting to help your child and worrying that you're helping too much. And trust me, everyone has advice on what you should do, everyone, right? And so I've had so many people come at me and say, oh, you need to tell my son's going to start taking junior college classes soon. And everyone's like, well, he doesn't drive yet. So you should just make him take the bus from day one. But here's the thing, that's not how my son operates. While I really can't drive him to school every single day for the next umpteen years, I can drive him. And I told him this, that I told him I'd do it for him for this first term until he felt more comfortable going to that school, and then he can figure out transportation, right? So I get this advice a lot from other parents. They're kind of like, oh, don't do that. Just make him take the bus right away. And I'm like, okay, but should I push him? Maybe, but I know my son and I know how his brain works. He does best with small incremental steps. Too many changes at once, too many challenges at once, he will just shut down. And when he shuts down, he really shuts down. He almost becomes frozen. And people will tell me, oh, just make him do it. And I have to laugh because my son is almost 6 feet tall and twice my size. I can't make him do anything. I mean, sure, I could shut down the internet for him. I could take things away. But what we know from decades of research that punishment and negative reinforcement, they don't really create long-term change. And it just sort of creates fear and resentment and withdrawal. And that's not going to help create trust with my son and I. So but I question that. I wonder that. Am I doing the right things for my son? Am I being too easy on him? Should I be harder? And then I often wonder, do I know too much? If being a therapist has made me overthink every decision, right? Maybe if I were a lawyer or a real estate agent or something, or less trained in emotional regulation, would I have pushed him harder or differently? Maybe that would have worked better. I don't know. But then I have to remind myself, I know my child, I know what works for him. And that's what every parent tries to do. Respond to the child they have, not the one that they imagined. And that's evolution too. That's the evolution of parenting. Is now as parents, people are teaching parents how to approach their children differently. It used to be like the kid just fit into your life however it was going to be. And the changes and the evolution that we're seeing is we're starting to see, oh, wait a second, we need to parent the child that we have, not the child that we think we should want or the child that we think they should be or anything else, but we need to parent who that child is right in front of me. And so all of this, there is method to my madness. All of this connects back to what's happening in the workplace right now, because the Gen Zers that we're hiring and managing and criticizing are all products of these same choices that other parents like myself have made. They are the children of Gen Xers who wanted to create emotionally safe homes. They are the grandchildren of boomers who wanted financial stability. They're the great grandchildren of people who survived wars and depressions and said, never again. So when you zoom out, you see that this generational progression is just really humanity learning how to feel. The silent generation, they prize survival. Boomers tend to prize success. Gen Xers, we prize independence. Millennials tend to prize purpose. And now we see Gen Z, they prize wellness. And that's not regression, that's growth. So, the same way I can look back at my parents and see how they tried to be better than their own parents, we can look at Gen Z and see that they're trying to do the same, that they're not rejecting work or responsibility. What they're really rejecting is burnout. They're saying, I want to build a life where I can thrive, not just survive. And that's the same instinct that drove my mother not to repeat the same patterns that her mother had, that drove my father not to be so critical. And it drives me to make sense for my son's mental health. It's evolution in action. And like all evolution, it's messy, it's uncomfortable. It doesn't always look right when you're in it, but progress rarely does. And so recently this year, my father passed away, and I've been thinking a lot about him since he passed. And, I used to drive him crazy because I always wanted to talk about feelings. He didn't like that so much. But in the last few years of his life, things shifted for him. When I brought up hard things, he didn't run, he didn't push away, he didn't get defensive. He was able to take a lot of accountability, and he met me, where I was. And that allowed me to see him differently. Not the father that couldn't handle emotions, but the man who's doing his own kind of evolution in a way. And so now when I look at my son, a young man who struggles, who feels very deeply, who can express himself, who knows how to use I statements and advocate for his needs, I see that evolution continuing. So my dad couldn't be vulnerable because it wasn't safe when he was young. I could be vulnerable, but only within certain limits. And now my son lives in a world where his vulnerability is seen as a strength, where therapy is normal, where mental health is part of the conversation. That's the trajectory. That's the progress. So when people complain about Gen Z being too soft, too emotional, too unwilling to just push through, I want to say, hey, that's kind of how we all raised them. Right? We all did. And thank God for that, because maybe they're going to be the first generation that doesn't have to unlearn, all of the unlearn survival before they can learn to live. Right? If the purpose of life is to get better, to evolve, then all of this is what it looks like, what's happening right now. It's imperfect, it's frustrating, it's slow, but it's working. And Gen Z is showing us what's next. All right. A world where mental health and empathy and boundaries are not luxuries anymore. They're standards. And maybe that's not something to criticize. Maybe that's something to celebrate. So thank you so much for listening to the Gen Mess with Tess. If you connected with this episode, share it with a friend, leave a review, let me know what you think. Hey, because this generational mess that we're in, it's not a mistake. It's a good thing. It's an evolution. And together we can move forward. All right. Thanks so much for tuning in.